Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to work on this still life drawing with a collection of objects here. What we're going to be focusing on is comparative measuring and using an envelope shape to get started with where these objects are lining up and interacting with each other. So we can use our own pencil as a measuring tool or as a measuring stick. So this little illustration of the hand holding the pencil is symbol of how we can hold up our pencil and look at our reference, whether it's a still life in front of us or the photo that I'm sharing with you here. We're holding the pencil vertically and just checking out what is above and below a certain landmark or interaction between objects. Comparative measuring looks above and below, and it can also look left and right. And these vertical and horizontal alignments can tell us a lot about where these objects are in space and how they're lining up with each other. So here I'm lining the pencil up with the lefternmost edge of the pear, and I'm noticing how that lines up with landmarks on the mouth, the plaster cast of the mouth, and also on the knuckle of the thumb of that hand sculpture below. So practice it before you even start drawing. Just take a look at the reference or whatever your still life is and hold up your pencil and just see how that looks. So here I'm using some horizontal alignments, looking left and right of that blue spout on that pitcher and how that lines up with the top of that plaster cast and also the handle on the left. Here I'm looking at the height of the very top of the stem of the pear, and I'm noticing that it's above the top of the pitcher. They look pretty close to each other, but using an alignment like this will tell us how high or how low an object is going to be. So I'll be doing that throughout the drawing, but I just wanted to show it as an example here in the beginning before we get started. I also want to show you how to use your pencil to measure angles and to help you get started with the envelope shape. The envelope shape is a simple shape that contains all of the objects here and their relationship to the negative space around them. So here I'm lining up the edge of that lemon with the bottom left corner of that white cube, and it creates some negative space between them, and that it can also help me draw the outer contour of the lemon. Here I'm doing the same thing with the pear and that top right corner of the plaster cast. This also helps me notice the angle of the pear as a whole, as like a simple shape, before I get into those subtle complex curves. Here I'm just measuring the angle of an object. So I'm using my pencil to measure the angle of that plane of the base of the thumb on the hand sculpture. And here I'm using my pencil to measure the angle of the blue pitcher. It's not quite perfectly vertical, it's at a very subtle, slight angle. So using my pencil as a measuring stick is going to help me notice that. So try it out. Use your pencil. You can also use like a long stick, like a barbecue skewer or something like that. When you're measuring, make sure you're holding your arm straight out in front of you and not bending your elbow. Your arm will be more stable if it's fully stretched out. And it'll help you also to draw at an arm's length away from your paper, which I've mentioned before in class is a good way to draw, just being more zoomed out and viewing the whole picture plane. So we can get started here. I'm using a charcoal pencil, a 2B charcoal pencil. And I'm going to mark off some halfway points vertically and horizontally here, just to give myself a guide. We're not going to use a full-on grid system, although this form of measuring, this comparative measuring, works like a grid. And I'll explain why. But I'm just going to start off with some simple construction lines, trying to find that envelope shape. And again, what I mean by that envelope shape is like a really simple outline, just using straight lines that contains all of the objects and all of the negative space between them. This still life is really like a boxy setup, so this envelope shape almost looks like a couple of buildings or something. I'm paying attention to this handle here on the blue pitcher. and all of the objects and paying attention to their proximity to the outer edge of the frame. Here we've got the spout of the pitcher. And I'm not trying to draw it absolutely perfectly from the start right now, but I'm trying to pay attention to where it lines up with the halfway mark. Overlaps a little bit. So you won't see me measuring because it's off camera, but as I hold up my pencil like I demonstrated in the beginning, I'm looking vertically and horizontally, above and below and left and right of these points. They're all a little bit off from each other, and that's by design. I set up this still life in this way on purpose, so we could look at what landmarks do line up with each other and which ones are a little bit offset from each other. This brick down here in the bottom right is a great landmark because it's simple and trustworthy. We can trust that the way it interacts with the ground plane makes it horizontal, so it's nice. It's a good right angle down in the bottom right corner. These more organic forms like the lemon, the hand sculpture, the mouth cast, and the pear are less reliable. They have more subtle curves. Even this spout of the pitcher right here. So I'll still try to draw them, but I won't trust them as much as the simpler, heavier, blocky shapes. And I will make some mistakes here and erase them and correct them. That's part of measuring, is not just measuring something and then drawing it perfectly. Measuring, what it really does is it informs us on our mistakes, and then we can make corrections. So much of drawing is making corrections and then correcting those corrections, making it a little bit better step by step. If you want it to be perfect from the start, you're better off just taking a photo or tracing a photo, but I don't really think that's what drawing is. We're figuring it out as we go, trying to understand what we see and how we're seeing it. Right here, I'm paying close attention to the negative space between all these objects that are interacting here, kind of swirling around the center of the picture plane. That negative shape on its own, paying attention to the negative shape instead of the positive shapes of the objects around it, that too will help us draw the outer contour of each object. I'm trying to pay attention to the top of the hand here, lining up horizontally with the bottom of the pitcher, and then also paying attention to the corner of the lips there that I was just drawing in for the mouth, lining that up with the hand below it. So keep checking in above and below and left and right. And the more we make a habit out of that, the more intuitive it will become. A lot of the time that I'm drawing now, I don't even really have to hold my arm out and measure. I can just look above and below. It's just a habit as I draw. Each mark that I make, I'm checking in above and below and left and right to see what it might be lining up with and how I can use those landmarks to put my mark in the right place. It might feel slower now and a little bit out of your comfort zone to draw that way, but it's worth practicing. The more you do it, the easier it'll get and the smoother and more intuitive it will feel. I can tell something's off here with the cast shadow under the hand in the side of the brick because there's not enough room. You can see this front plane of the brick here is taller. It should interact with the lemon in a different way. So I'm just going to keep drawing and keep moving around and try and solve the problem. Sometimes we try to fix something that seems a little bit off and we look more and more closely and everything seems to be lining up okay. It may not be that thing itself, it might be something around it and the way all of those pieces relate to each other. My guess is the hand is too low, but we'll see. This is why you don't want to get too caught up with details early on in the drawing. You might draw the details perfectly, but if they're in the wrong spot, it's going to look wrong and it's also going to mess up with all of your other measurements. A lot of our measurements are based on previous measurements, so these early marks are really, really important. Especially having the drawing next to the reference like it's set up here on the screen. It's not actually how I was set up when I was drawing it. I was looking across my desk at a computer screen. But if you can set up your drawing with either a printed out photo or a still life setup with an easel, having your paper vertical, you can transfer those angles from what you're looking at straight across to your paper, and it's in a really simple and direct way. You can get really accurate measurements like that. Still using lots of straight, simple construction lines. A lot of subtle curves here in this mouth shape. I'm not trying to be detailed right now. I'm just trying to get the size and shape accurate, but still simple. We can always add details and add complexity, but if we do that in the wrong spot, it's not really worth doing. So I just coming down from the mouth shape onto that chin form is where I noticed that the hand was a little too low again. So by redrawing the thumb right on top of what I had, I'm looking at the hand coming from a different direction, which is going to help inform where the boundary of that hand is actually going to be. So sometimes coming in from a different side can be helpful. It can be so difficult to see past the errors we make. So looking at it from a different perspective can really make that clear. In this case, instead of coming up from the bottom of the picture plane, I was coming down from the top, still making the same measurements, and that's where it jumped out to me that the hand shape was too low. Remember, I'm also using my pencil as a measuring tool to check out all these different angles of the fingers here. Another way to check in with an angle is to think of it as the hand on a clock and what time it might be pointing to. Or you could think of it as the arrow on a compass. Ask yourself, is that angle facing north or northwest or southeast? It can just help you see an angle in a different way, separate from the object that you're trying to draw. Even with these shadows, there's these cast shadow angles that we're starting to notice here. So as I come across measuring horizontally, I'm lining up the top of this plaster cast with the top of the handle connecting to the pitcher. That tells me the plaster cast can go a little bit lower, which makes sense because the pear felt too small. So now I can make the pear larger as well. So shifting one thing over can set off a chain of events, hopefully for the better. And even there, I'm still paying attention to the negative space between the pear and the spout of the pitcher and the shape that's created between them. I can use that to help me draw the outline of the positive shapes. I'm drawing pretty heavy on the outlines here, keeping everything pretty linear. I recommend everyone to draw a little bit lighter. I'm trying to draw dark so you can see it clearly. But keep everything light and soft as long as you can. I'm going to use the brush here to soften everything and push it back a little bit. And you can keep measuring and rechecking everything for a really long time. You can make it as perfect as you want. Or you might get it to a place where it feels good enough for you. It's different for everybody how perfect you want it to be. My focus here today is the measuring itself and just getting an accurate line drawing. I might block in the shadows later, but I'm going heavy on the lines so you can see it and so you can notice how these are all lining up with each other. I mentioned earlier that this method is similar to using a grid, but a little bit different. It's similar in that we're looking above and below and left and right to make sure we're in the right spot. It's different because we're figuring that out for ourselves. A grid will just tell you exactly where to go all the time, and it doesn't leave too much room for a spontaneous mark that has a little bit more gesture or flow in it. It's just kind of copying an image without any real engagement. I don't think using a grid helps you grow your skills. It might help you make a nice looking drawing, but it won't really help you grow your drawing skills, or more importantly, your observational skills. So much of drawing is just how you see. So this does strengthen those skills. So by not using a grid and measuring it with our own pencil, or just eyeballing it, looking above and below and noticing different alignments, that will help your drawing skills. It'll take you out of trying to draw a hand and making it look like what you think a hand should look like, and just paying attention to the object in front of you, looking at it objectively, whether it's the lemon or the pear or the mouth, whatever it is. If we're less hung up on making it look like the symbol or the icon of what we think those things are, and just looking at angles on their own, separate from what we label them as, that's where this measuring will really help your observational skills and make your drawings better. A grid doesn't really do any of that. It just kind of tells you where to put the lines, which can be helpful if you're in a rush and you got to make something look more accurate. But if you want to grow your skills, I recommend using this method instead of a grid. At this point in the drawing, everything feels more or less in its place. So I'm starting to look at the shadow shapes and the different kinds of edges they have, whether it's a softer edged form shadow or a sharper edged cast shadow, or a slow plane change with a smooth transition, or a really fast plane change with a more abrupt transition from light to dark. But I can still use those measuring tools, whether it's measuring the angle with my pencil or doing the vertical and horizontal alignments. I can do that to the shadows just as much as the objects themselves. A light shape or a shadow shape or a certain gradation can be a compositional element just as much as any tangible object. So push yourself to look at your composition in that way. We'll revisit that idea later on in the semester, but it's worth looking at now. Seeing your composition as a jigsaw puzzle of all these different shapes snapping together. Think about what forms might be brighter and lighter, and still push yourself to express that in the kinds of lines you're making. I made the left side of the picture really dark and heavy just because it feels dark and heavy, whereas some objects are lighter and brighter and feel that way, or they might feel a little bit softer or sharper or rougher or smooth. Think about all that as you mark up the page with your pencil. I'm going to block in the shadows in a pretty simple way. Not too worried about the gradations of light and dark, but I encourage everyone to go as deep as you want with that. I'm just going to map out the shadows with a really simple pattern here, using the side of my pencil to unify the shadow shapes, and just to give us a sense of where the light is coming from and how it's affecting the objects. You're free to take that as far as you want. If you want to spend most of your time this week just measuring and getting everything in the right place, I encourage that. But I encourage everyone to explore the whole value range here and let the light and shadow bring it to life. Just using the eraser here to pull out some of the light shapes. I didn't pay too much attention to the fabric in the background. Do a deep dive into that as well if you're up for it. I'm using the Strathmore drawing paper here. As we start to get into some longer drawings, I recommend using nice drawing paper. These will feel less like exercises and more like finished drawings. And again, I always encourage everyone to work from your own still life setup if you want to. You're not required to work from this image here. Just be aware of the lighting. Here I'm using a single light source coming from above and to the right, so it's coming down at an angle. You can see from the shadow shapes that it's coming across at like a diagonal angle to the objects. Just be aware of your light source, whatever it might be. If it's light from a window, that's great. Just be aware of how that is going to interact with whatever it is that you're drawing. And pay attention to each object, but also pay attention to how they all relate to each other, how they're all participating in the composition in a certain way. A good drawing and a good painting, it's a cultivation of all these little relationships, one thing relating to the next. So you don't work one object to completion and then another object fully finished. You don't want to create little islands in your drawing. Even if something is meant to feel isolated, you want all of the pieces to be talking to each other in a purposeful way, whatever that might be. So as you work on each object, think about what it is and what it looks like, but also think about what it's doing. Is it pulling its weight as a character in your picture? If it doesn't feel necessary, take it out. I feel like each object in this picture is functioning and participating pretty well. Using the side of my pencil on the picture over here to explore different kinds of textures. It's sort of a departure from the photo, which is pretty smooth and glossy and reflective. But I'm having fun with my pencil. Remember that any photo reference is a good servant but a terrible master. You don't have to be totally linked to the photo all the time. Take from it what's useful and leave what's not. And that is up to you. What you find meaningful is up to you. Can take this to whatever level of finish that you'd like. The main thing I'd like you to focus on is having accurate proportions through comparative measuring and measuring the angles with your pencil, using the envelope shape to notice negative space to help you draw the size and shape of each object correctly, and paying attention to how all the objects relate to each other to create a dynamic composition. It's a good still life photo. Have fun exploring it. And I'll see you all next week. Thanks for being here. Please post your work on the discussion board too so we can all check it out. Thanks, everybody.